2006, Vancouver, the Women's Rugby World Cup final. Yeah, this is still a motorsport channel, just hear me out for a sec. This match is being held between two nations so passionately dedicated to the sport, and to them this is the day of reckoning, and their lifelong dream. But unfortunately for them, that passion isn't matched by the fans, mainly because there were no fans. No one turned up that day. There was just no interest in the women's division of the sport at the time, and to some of the more extreme bunch, it wasn't even a sport. Fast forward to 2022, and things are a little bit different. The National Stadium of New Zealand sold out to watch these women compete in the World Cup final, and ended up producing one of the greatest games of the sport that you would ever see. Yeah, it's kind of a relatively niche sport, but the effect that this game had is profound in all sorts of ways, and it was in complete contrast as to what was happening 5,000 miles away. The drivers of the all-women's W Series were left in limbo as the season was cancelled before the final 2 rounds could be run. The issues plaguing the series becoming too much and leaving the future of the series in serious doubt. A few months go by and we would get confirmation that the series has indeed died out, consigned to the motor racing graveyard and leaving multiple drivers without a seat. And so now we're asking ourselves the question, what the f*** happened to the W Series?
We are the music makers. And we are the dreamers of dreams.
Female participation in motorsport hasn't been the best, to put it mildly. While we have had the likes of Michelle Mouton, the absolute goddess of rallying from France, who took on the guys and freaking beat them in the scariest rally cars of them all, Group B, there haven't been nearly enough of them to come along since humans started racing virtually anything that had wheels on it. So with a desire to make the paddock less of a sausage fest, there were concerted efforts made to help curb this issue. Around the end of 2017, rumors abounded an all-female racing series would be set up as a response to the lack of female participation in motorsport, and in particular on the Formula 1 feeder series ladder. Now, an all-female racing series isn't exactly a new invention. It's been attempted before in the past, with the likes of the Mazda 121 Challenge in Australia in the 90s and Formula Woman in the UK in the early 2000s. However, neither of those series used open-wheeler cars. This rumored series was set to do that, and seemed to have far greater ambitions than what those previous two did. Finally, on the 10th of October 2018, the series was officially launched. It would be known as the W Series. The series would utilize 18 identical Tatuus T318 cars with Alfa Romeo engines and running Hankook tires. But one of the big things about this championship was the prize pool, with $500,000 going to the champion and going all the way down to the driver who got 18th, who got about $20 worth of BP voucher. So these cars weren't quite in Formula 3, but more sort of Formula Regional spec. But hey, they were still open wheelers and they still went vroom vroom. It had the support of F1 veterans David Coulthard and Adrian Newey, and was spearheaded by Catherine Bonmuir. Now, there's no such thing as a free lunch in motorsport. Even if you are attached to an academy, I mean, that shit ain't free. I mean, yeah, there are various funds and initiatives, but the W Series got about as close as you can get to a free lunch. For the drivers, instead of forking out hundreds of thousands for a season, in this series, they wouldn't have to pay a penny. And in lieu of this extraordinary generosity, the 18 drivers for the series would be selected by a judging panel that consisted of David Coulthard, former F1 driver Alexander Verse, and Sebring 12-hour winner Lynn St. James. As Coulthard put it,
"At the moment, women racing drivers tend to reach a glass ceiling at around Formula 3 level on their learning curve, often as a result of lack of funding rather than a lack of talent. That's why an all-new, all-female single-seater motor racing series is required to establish a competitive and constructive motor racing habitat in which our drivers will be able to equip themselves with the necessary skill set eventually to move on up to existing high-level mainstream racing series and compete with the best male drivers on equal terms."
Well, that's all very nice, but the series got immediate pushback from people who believed the very concept of the series was flawed, and that it was, in essence, segregation. Drivers Pippa Mann and Sophia Flörsch were particularly vocal, with Pippa labeling it a sad day for motorsport. Ouch. Simona De Silvestro suggested that perhaps the $1.5 million that was put toward the prize fund would be better spent toward a driver development program similar to the ones put in place by Formula 1 academies. Even Michelle Mouton, the Wonder Woman of motor racing, criticized the series for operating at a limited level since the best performers don't participate. But them's were the comments made by actual racing drivers. When it came to the public, you could kind of imagine what the response was like. But whether it was right or wrong, just or not, the series would go ahead. So, The year 2019 would see the debut of the series. The task of selecting the 18 drivers that would compete in the championship was relatively straightforward. There were a series of modules dished out to the competitors based on a variety of things: racecraft, fitness level, sponsorship pitches, media relations, hostage negotiations, anything and everything that you would associate with the realities of being a race car driver. Because this may come as a shock to some of you, but being a race car driver ain't just about, racing cars? I mean, it kind of is if you come from money, but if you don't, you've got to possess every damn skill on the planet before you hop into a racing car. You got to forge contacts, then find sponsors within that contact list, parlay with teams to get seats, negotiate and hassle to try and get the best deal possible, build a social media empire, find your USP, stay in shape, obviously, and absolutely dedicate yourself in every conceivable way to better yourself not just as a racing driver, but as a marketing commodity. Following their modules, the candidates would head to the Circuito de Almeida in Spain to take part in a series of races before the final few who made the cut would attend an evaluation that would determine the grid for the forthcoming season. Of the 56 drivers that entered, these were the 28 that were then sent through to the final stage. And from there, these were the 18 drivers that would ultimately line up for the first ever W Series race in May that year. So pretty good, right? Well, not quite. There was some conjecture about who was selected and who was not. For example, the likes of Chelsea Angelo and Charlotte Pointing were amongst the fastest on pure pace. They didn't even get through to the final stage, with Pointing saying that they obviously weren't looking for the fastest drivers. The others disagreed and said that it was as fair can be. But I suppose if there's any cream of comfort to take from this, it's that Carmen Jorda didn't make the final cut either. So let's just take that dub and move on. On the 4th of May, the W Series turned up to the Hockenheim Ring in Germany as part of the support card for the DTM series for their inaugural race and motor racing history. What's the best way to describe what happened? Well, it was a typical Formula Regional race. Not that that's a bad thing, but rather we got to see these drivers a little bit better, rather than having them drown in a Formula 3 team that had less resources in a cave. Heading into that season, there were indeed some favourites to take the championship, that being Beitske Visser, Alice Powell, and of course, Jamie Chadwick. This pretty much played out when those three locked out the first 4 positions, with karting prospect and Renault F1 Academy driver Marta Garcia taking 3rd on the dais. The rest of the races that season took place at Zolder, Misano, Norrisring, Assen, and Brands Hatch. They were all world-class racetracks, but a far way away from the Hermann Tilke parking lots we've become accustomed to in modern-day F1. And that was a good thing, because it meant that these drivers were actually challenged. That final race at Brands Hatch was a showdown between Chadwick and Visser, with Chadwick on pole position, and Brands Hatch being virtually impossible to pass on in an open wheeler. All Chaddis had to do was believe in the Eurowash and cruise home to victory. I mean, you'd think. Despite those fears that this championship would just be a walkover, she was being hounded a lot of the time by the likes of Visser, Alice Powell, and Emma Kymäläinen. And in this finale, just that was happening. At some point during the race, Powell decided that Chadwick was spoiling the view a little bit, dived down the inside at Paddock Hill Bend, and pulled off a move that Clay Regazzoni could only dream about. Kymäläinen saw this as an open door, and threw Jamie down to 3rd, and right into the clutches of Beitske Visser. When Miki Koyama's clutch went on strike, the safety car was brought out. With 6 minutes remaining, Visser, a former Red Bull junior, knew that it was virtually a win it or bin it scenario, and so she sent it. She may have been introduced to some lawn mowing in that process, but she did move up to 3rd. As things stood, Chadwick had a 10-point lead in the standings, but if Visser took the lead, the standings would go to a countback, and would ultimately give Visser the championship. It was a great effort to get up to 3rd, but it was just, and only just, not enough. Powell won the race, Kymäläinen 2nd, and Visser in 3rd. Chadwick did finish in 4th, but she became the inaugural W Series champion. When you boil it all down, it was a decent first year for the championship. Good racing up and down the field, and a nail-biting finale to cap it all off. Yeah, it wasn't perfect, and yeah, there were some drivers in there who perhaps shouldn't have been there. But that's a problem with every racing series that ever existed, ever. Not just this one. It was a good initiative, it was a good start, and next year was sure to be better. Except, one must remember what that next year was. Ah yes, the year where the world ended. For about 2 years, the motorsport world ground to a halt, and obviously, this included the W Series. It was announced in June that the series would not be run that year, and instead all efforts would be redirected to 2021. We would, however, see some racing from these gals that year. On iRacing. It was slightly harebrained in that they ran Formula Renault cars on typical tracks such as Monza, Interlagos, Brands Hatch, Suzuka, Bathurst, Nürburgring Nordschleife. Okay, what? Despite this rather dangerous, albeit rather brilliantly dangerous calendar, the racing was actually quite decent. And remember, this was around the same time that the V8 Supercar series had their own esports series. which went well. Weitske won the series with a round to spare. But if we're honest, we wanted to get back to some real racing here. We wouldn't get that in 2020, but for 2021, the W Series will be put on the support bill for the Formula One World Championship. This was mega news, something that would seriously raise the profile of the championship and give these drivers the recognition that they need. The first round was in Austria, and Chadwick was heavily favoured to defend her championship, although it didn't get off to the best of starts. However, she eventually ascended to the level we kind of expected of her in the first place. A win in race 2, as well as another in Hungary, and 2 in Austin, gave her her second W Series crown, with Alice Powell in second, and Emma Kymäläinen in third. Up and down the field, there were other drivers who were showing their strengths. Fabian Volven, for example, often showed some great stuff throughout the year, and Abby Pulling secured a pole position as a reserve driver in the final round in Austin. The new super sub, now that Roberto Moreno's gone fishing. But if we're all going to be totally honest here, the 2021 season was largely memorable for 2 reasons. Spa-Francorchamps is an unforgiving circuit at the best of times, but when it starts to play God, it gets straight up nasty. During qualifying for round 5 of the championship, the conditions were fine. Just. When the drivers reached the dreaded Eau Rouge, they found a surface that produced grip levels that could best be described as no. Sarah Moore went off first, then Abby Eaton. Then when Weitske followed suit, things started to get scary. Ayla Agron joined, and so did Belen Garcia, throwing Visser's car up into the air, and when it finally came back down to rest, Volven threw it back up into the air again, whilst taking the rear axle along with her. All in all, 6 cars were involved in this pileup. How these drivers never picked up an injury, in particular Visser, who spent more time airborne here than what Grosjean did back in 2012, is a testament to the safety of them cars, and the effectiveness of the Halo. Especially so soon after what happened at that part of the track with Juan Manuel Correa and Antoine Hubert. All you care about in that scenario is that all the drivers walked away. But once that dust settled, an unfortunate consequence is that any of the doubters who watched that plane crash would have started to draw conclusions about the skill level of the series, despite the fact that literally every other racing series that has ever raced here ever has had crashes like that at that corner. Something else that was notable that season occurred in the last round in Austin. Abby Eaton's car was thrown into the air by one of those stupid freaking curbs designed by even stupider people, and when her car came back down to earth, she fractured her T4 vertebrae, another victim of the worst invention by the FIA since the FIA itself. And so heading into 2022, we perhaps were looking forward to another crop of drivers coming through and proving their worth. I mean, after all, this is a feeder series, and the objective is to prove your worth here and then progress to the next stage. But what we got instead was that 2-time defending champion, Jamie Chadwick, would return for the season. And this whole damn thing kind of defeated the purpose and the goal set forth by the series. In Formula 3 and Formula 2, if you become champion, you can't return. And that was the aim here, but obviously that wasn't enforced. Why this was, I have no idea. At this point, despite all cars being run by RR Racing, drivers were consigned to teams, most of which were only really there for identification purposes. But eventually some sponsors did come along and essentially purchased naming rights to those teams. And one of those sponsors would attach themselves to Chadwick's team for the 2022 season. It was, of course, Caitlyn Jenner. Once a racer, always a racer. But despite the added exposure for the series this most definitely generated, and the novel ambitions of becoming the Roger Penske of the series, it did come with a lot of controversy. As with the previous 2 seasons, the drivers were selected via an evaluation, with the exception of the top 8 finishers from the previous year, who gained automatic entry onto the grid for 2022. For the second year in a row, the series would be on the Formula One support bill, and the season would begin for them in Miami. Nuria Marti started on pole position, and was still on it as everyone else started the race. From then on in, there was some great battling for the lead between Chadwick, Kymäläinen, and Marta Garcia. Perhaps the dredge of another runaway Chadders victory was behind us. Well, no. Thanks to some slightly unhelpful gymnastics, Chadwick won the first race of the season, and the second, and the third, and the fourth, and the 5th. The only thing that could really match Chadwick's winning streak was Kymäläinen's spinning one. The closest anyone really got to her was Abby Pulling in Barcelona. But still, this was domination on a grand scale. It wasn't until round 6 where Alice Powell finally broke the streak, but by that time, the championship was all but over. Chadders had virtually sewn up her 3rd W Series crown. The next round was in Japan, or at least it was supposed to be. Unfortunately, the series hit a snag with what they described as unforeseeable operational challenges, and a lot of people who have watched and been involved in motorsport long enough looked at that and thought, oh crap. Here we go again. Yes, there were legitimately some unforeseen circumstances that were plaguing everyone around the world financially. But to some, this could be seen as the proverbial death rattle of a racing series where stuff starts falling apart like an Ocean Gate submarine. To help mitigate these financial issues, cars for the Singapore round were on loan from the Toyota Racing Series in New Zealand. Visser dominated the race, whilst Chatters found the barriers after neglecting to brake for turn 7. But aside from the ridiculous sight of drivers having to haul their race seats to the cars on foot through the city streets, there were already grave concerns regarding whether or not the series would ever live to see the end of the season. There were still 3 rounds to be held in the United States and Mexico, but on the 10th of October, all of this came to a grinding halt. The season was cancelled. Chadwick was crowned champion yet again with a 50-point buffer over Visser. Crucially, it was only the season that was cancelled at this point. CEO Catherine Bonmuir remained optimistic that this series would return stronger than ever come the year 2023. But aside from the absence of money, which does make logistics a little bit tricky, there was something else that was threatening the existence of the series. There were already rumors that Formula One themselves were looking to implement a similar series of their own. And on November 2022, this would come to fruition with the formation of the F1 Academy. Similar-ish cars, with dedicated stalwart teams such as Prema, Carlin, ART, MP, and Campos would make the series. Now, yeah, it's not actually on the F1 support bill, and the lack of live broadcasting is absolutely unacceptable, and there are some interesting aspects regarding those cars. And I'll just leave it at that. But by the 29th of April, they were racing. The W Series, meanwhile, was completely silent, and most of its drivers had already jumped ship to the other pond. We all kind of knew what it meant. We were just awaiting confirmation. On the 15th of June 2023, we got it. The W Series was officially dead. The series had gone into administration, thus ending the championship and the lofty goals and ambitions that came with it. To some, it was labelled a dark day for women's motorsport. To others, it was a case of I told you so. To a lot of people though, only one word popped up: failure. This series was a failure. But was it? Really? I mean, as an actual racing series, yeah, it befell the financial boogeyman and was consigned to the motor racing graveyard. Unfortunately, sponsors and investors bailing on motor racing partnerships happens pretty much on a daily basis. That is the reality for this game, but it's even more so for female drivers. And for the series, that was the death blow. But the purpose of this series went beyond existing to cater to kids born with a silver spoon in their mouths. For some of those drivers, this series got them racing again, since the season was free and they had no money to race in the first place. Because of the series, they were able to keep their careers going. And their performances, at least for some of them, helped them get noticed, as opposed to if they were drowning in Formula Regional, with the team using parts from the Stone Age. They've since gone on to other racing series. A few of them have been successful, and some even have attached themselves to Formula One academies. But thinking back to that World Cup final mentioned at the very start of the video, that was a long way away from where that particular sport used to be. It went from having no one paying attention, no one watching, to having a whole nation watching, with a packed out national stadium. And with the right marketing and the right amount of exposure for the sport, it inspired the next generation of girls to partake in the sport, to emulate their heroes. For way too long, girls have been told they can't be racing drivers. It might not be the only thing, but this series changed a lot of things. Female participation in motorsport across the board has risen since this championship came about, and a few years down the line, hopefully, more will start cropping up around the Formula One feeder series ladder. So yeah, the racing series itself is dead. Drivers were not paid the prize money in that final season, and yeah, you heard that right. The big draw card of the series was not delivered and left the drivers out of pocket, with the crippling financial circumstances proving why there is no free lunch in this game. And I'm not gonna gaslight you all here and say that it was a grid full of Formula One worthy talents, because it wasn't that. But the series did achieve its goal of boosting the appeal of the sport to those who aren't, you know, male. Look, we all want the sport to thrive. We want it to go from strength to strength. And while the series is gone, it might just have served as the catalyst for the better.